"You can't have that fire here," she said, her voice slicing through the quiet evening air like a shard of glass. "It's a violation." I looked from the crackling flames in my fire pit to the woman standing on the edge of my property line. She was silhouetted against the setting sun, a stout figure with her hands planted firmly on her hips, a posture of absolute, unshakable authority. This was Carol, president of the Serenity Cove Homeowners Association, and my first official welcome to the neighborhood had apparently arrived. The truth is, some battles you choose, and some battles choose you. I had moved to this quiet lakeside community seeking peace, a place to mend the shattered pieces of my life after my wife, Sarah, had passed. I was a civil engineer, a man who believed in structure, in plans, in the logical and orderly progression of things. My life had become anything but. This house, this land, was supposed to be the foundation for a new, quieter structure. I had no interest in conflict. But as Carol stood there, radiating a bizarre mixture of suburban rage and self-righteousness over a perfectly legal, contained bonfire, I felt a familiar, unwelcome tremor. It was the feeling of a carefully designed plan about to be tested by an unforeseen stressor. I just had no idea how much stress she was about to apply. Little did she know, I owned the very ground her power was built on, and when you push an engineer too far, he doesn't just get mad. He starts checking the foundations. My name is Mark, and for 25 years, I built things. Bridges, municipal water systems, roadways. I took chaotic landscapes and imposed order upon them with concrete, steel, and mathematics. My wife, Sarah, used to joke that I was trying to blueprint the entire world. She was the artist, the one who brought color and chaos and life to my black and white drawings. When I lost her to cancer, the color bled out of my world, leaving only the stark, gray lines. We had bought this plot of land years ago, a sprawling 5-acre parcel on the edge of a new development called Serenity Cove. It was our retirement plan. I would build the house, a testament to solid engineering, and she would build the gardens, a testament to wild, beautiful life. She never got the chance. After she was gone, I was left with the blueprints and a hole in my heart the size of a quarry. Building the house myself became my therapy. Every nail hammered, every wire run, was an act of defiance against the chaos that had taken her. It was a solid, tangible thing in a world that had become frighteningly ephemeral. When it was finished, I sold our old home in the city and moved in, hoping the quiet and the familiar scent of pine would offer some kind of solace. The house sat at the very end of a cul-de-sac, bordering a large, undeveloped tract of common land. It was perfect. Private, quiet, with room to breathe. The rest of Serenity Cove was a different story. It was a picture-perfect postcard of suburban order. The lawns were uniformly green, the mailboxes identical, the houses painted from a palette of 3 approved shades of beige. It was clear that this was a place governed by rules. I received the welcome packet from the Homeowners Association a week after I moved in. It was a binder 3 inches thick, filled with covenants, conditions, and restrictions. CC and RS, the holy scripture of the suburban dominion. I skimmed it, noted the basics: no boats in the driveway, trash cans hidden from view, lawn height not to exceed 3 inches. It seemed standard, if a bit suffocating. I filed it away, content to be left alone on my little slice of the world. My first encounter with Carol was 2 weeks later. I was planting a small memorial garden for Sarah at the edge of the woods behind my house. It was where she had wanted her vegetable patch. I was turning over the soil when a shadow fell over me. "That's a lovely spot," a voice chirped. It was Carol. She had a bright, fixed smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her eyes were like a surveyor's transit, cold and calculating, measuring my every move. "Just getting some things planted," I said, leaning on my shovel. "Wonderful. Just make sure you submit a landscaping modification form to the Architectural Review Committee first," she said, the smile never wavering. "We like to maintain a consistent aesthetic throughout the community." I looked at the patch of dirt, 100 yards from the nearest neighboring house and completely invisible from the street. "It's just a few flowers and a vegetable patch. All modifications require approval, Mr." She paused, waiting. "Mark," I supplied. "Mark," she repeated, as if logging it into a database. "The rules are in place to protect our property values. I'm sure you understand." She gave a little wave and walked off, her stride brisk and purposeful. I was left with the distinct feeling that I had just been audited. That was the first red flag, a hairline crack in the facade of serenity. The bonfire was the inciting incident, the geological event that turned that hairline crack into a fault line. It was Sarah's birthday, the first one since she was gone. We had a tradition. Every year, we'd build a small, safe fire in the backyard, roast marshmallows, and she'd tell me her dreams for the coming year. It felt important to continue it, to send a little bit of that warmth and light up into the darkness for her. I used a steel fire pit on a wide gravel pad I'd built, far from any trees or structures. It was a textbook example of fire safety, something I would have signed off on in a professional capacity. The flames were cheerful, the wood smoke smelled of memory and nostalgia. My daughter, home from college for the weekend, was sitting with me. We were sharing stories about her mom, feeling her presence in the flickering light. That's when Carol marched onto my lawn. "I'm going to have to ask you to extinguish this immediately," she announced. There was no greeting, no preamble. Just a command. I stood up. "Excuse me. Open burning is a violation of Covenant 74B, she snapped, as if quoting scripture. "It creates a nuisance and a fire hazard." "This isn't open burning," I explained calmly, gesturing to the heavy-duty steel pit. "This is a recreational fire, and it's perfectly legal under county ordinance. I'm more than 50 feet from any structure." Her face tightened. It was clear she wasn't accustomed to being contradicted with facts. "I am the president of this HOA, and I am telling you it is a violation of our rules, which supersede county ordinances within Serenity Cove." This was, of course, legally nonsensical. An HOA can't override public safety laws. "I'm afraid that's not how it works," I said, my tone still even. "We're being perfectly safe." "We'll see about that," she sniffed. She pulled out her phone and stabbed at the screen with a manicured finger. "I'm calling the authorities to report an illegal and dangerous fire." My daughter looked at me, her eyes wide. I just sighed. The quiet moment of remembrance was shattered. Now it was a bureaucratic squabble. 20 minutes later, a fire truck from the local volunteer department rumbled down the cul-de-sac, followed by a sheriff's deputy. The flashing lights painted the whole ridiculous scene in strobes of red and blue. The fire chief, a man named Miller who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, took one look at my setup and grunted. "Looks fine to me," he said to the deputy. He turned to me. "Sorry to bother you, sir. We have to respond to every call." Carol, who had been standing by with a triumphant smirk, looked aghast. "What do you mean, it's fine? It's a huge fire. It's dangerous." Chief Miller looked at her, his expression weary. "Ma'am, it's a small fire in a UL-listed container on a non-combustible surface. He's following every county regulation. There's nothing for us to do here." They tipped their hats and left. Carol was left standing there, her face a mask of incandescent fury. The public validation of my position was a humiliation she clearly wasn't prepared to endure. She shot me a look that could have curdled steel. "This isn't over," she hissed, before turning on her heel and stomping back into the darkness. Watching her retreat, I felt a cold knot in my stomach. I knew she was right. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. I had unintentionally challenged the Queen in her own court, and now I had become a problem to be solved. The war for Serenity Cove had begun. The retaliation was not swift and dramatic. It was slow and insidious, a campaign of 1,000 paper cuts. A week after the bonfire incident, I received my first official violation notice. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope left in my mailbox, sealed with an embossed HOA logo. The violation: improper lawn maintenance. According to the attached, very blurry photo, the grass near my driveway was 325 inches high, a full quarter of an inch over the legal limit. The fine was $50. It was absurd. I had mowed 2 days prior. I went outside with a tape measure. Sure enough, there was one single, defiant clump of fescue that had shot up. I paid the fine. It wasn't worth the fight. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That was just the opening salvo. 2 weeks later, another envelope. This time, it was for an unapproved satellite dish. My dish was mounted on a pole in my backyard, completely concealed from the street by a stand of mature pine trees. The covenant stated that dishes had to be hidden from public view. Hers was a creative interpretation of the rule. The letter included another grainy photo, clearly taken by someone trespassing on my property to get the right angle. The fine was $100. This time, I wrote a polite, formal letter back, citing the specific rule and the Federal Communications Commission's over-the-air reception devices rule, which prohibits HOAs from unreasonably restricting the placement of satellite dishes. I included a map showing the dish was not visible from any public street or neighboring property. I sent it via certified mail. Her response was to double the fine for failure to cure the violation in a timely manner. It became a weekly ritual. A new violation for something more ridiculous than the last. My garden hose was improperly coiled, the welcome mat on my porch was a non-approved color, my security camera, a tiny dome under the eave of my garage, was an invasion of community privacy. Each notice was a little more aggressive, the fines escalating. Carol was building a case, brick by brick, painting me as a problem resident, a nonconformist who threatened the precious aesthetic of her kingdom. She also took her campaign to the community Facebook page. She never used my name, but her posts were transparent. A reminder to all residents, especially our newer ones, that the CC and RS are not suggestions. They are rules we all agree to live by to protect our shared investment or, concerned about fire safety in our community. Please report any unauthorized burning to the board immediately. Some people think they are above the rules. I could feel the eyes of my neighbors on me when I checked my mail or went for a walk. They were polite, but distant. No one wanted to be associated with the troublemaker. I was being socially isolated, painted as the nail that stuck up and was about to be hammered down. The frustration was building in me like hydrostatic pressure behind a dam. I had come here for peace, but my home was becoming a battleground. The turning point, the moment my passive frustration curdled into cold, calculated resolve, had to do with Sarah's garden. It was the one place I felt close to her, the one project that was more hers than mine. I had planted her favorite flowers, peonies and lavender, and had just put in a small stone bench. It was my sanctuary. One afternoon, I came home from a meeting to find another notice taped to my front door. This one wasn't in an envelope. It was a large, bright orange sticker that read, "Final Notice of Violation." It was for the garden. Unauthorized landscaping and construction of permanent structure, bench, without ARC approval. The notice stated I had 48 hours to remove the garden and the bench, or the HOA would hire a contractor to do it at my expense, and a lien would be placed on my property. But that wasn't what broke me. What broke me were the footprints. There were muddy tracks all through the flower beds, crushing the new peony shoots. Several lavender plants had been kicked over. They hadn't just inspected it. They had deliberately desecrated it. It was a message. A show of force. They had walked through my wife's memory in muddy boots. I stood there, the orange sticker in my hand, and looked at the casual vandalism. The dam of my patience didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The engineer in me, the part that had been trying to solve this problem with reason and logic, was shoved aside by something colder, something more primal. Carol had crossed a line. She had made it personal. She had mistaken my desire for peace as a weakness. She thought she was dealing with a sad, grieving man who could be easily bullied. She was about to find out she was dealing with a man who had designed and overseen the demolition of concrete bridges. I knew how to find structural weaknesses. I knew how to bring things down. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, the thick HOA binder open on my desk. I wasn't just reading it anymore. I was studying it, cross-referencing clauses, looking for loopholes, contradictions. But I knew the binder was only part of the equation. The real answers, the real leverage, wouldn't be in Carol's self-serving rules. They would be in the public record. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. It was a place I knew well from my professional life. A dusty repository of deeds, plats, and easements. It was the ultimate source of truth for any piece of land. I started with the basics. I pulled the master plat for the entire Serenity Cove subdivision. I unrolled the huge blueprint on a table, the smell of old paper and ink filling the air. I spent hours tracing the history of the development, parcel by parcel. I saw how the developer had pieced it together from several older, larger tracts of land. I noted the easements for utilities, the rights of way for roads. It was a complex puzzle, and I was meticulously putting it together. It was during this process that I started to get to know my neighbors, at least on paper. One of them was a man named Frank. His property was 2 doors down from mine. I'd seen him a few times, an older gentleman who was always working in his garage. He'd given me a friendly nod once or twice, but we'd never spoken. While reviewing the HOA documents, I noticed he was the only person who had ever formally challenged a fine and won. The records were sparse, but it was clear he knew how to push back. That evening, I saw him outside, cleaning his gutters. I decided to introduce myself. "Frank," I said, walking over. "I'm Mark, your new neighbor." He turned, a friendly but cautious look on his face. "Good to finally meet you. Heard you've been having a bit of a welcome party from our dear leader." His tone was dry, laced with irony. "You could say that," I admitted. "I was hoping I could ask you a question. I noticed in the records you challenged a fine a few years back." A wry smile touched his lips. "Ah, the great mailbox rebellion of 18. Carol tried to fine me because my mailbox was leaning 1/4 of a degree past vertical. I used to be a cop. A detective, for 30 years. I know a thing or two about procedure." He leaned against his ladder. "I requested all documentation related to the violation, including the accredited surveying equipment used to measure the angle, the calibration records for said equipment, and the certification of the person operating it." The fine mysteriously disappeared. I couldn't help but smile. "That's brilliant." "She's a bully," Frank said, his voice lowering. "She feeds on power, and she can't stand anyone who doesn't bow and scrape. Be careful, Mark. She doesn't fight fair." "I'm beginning to realize that," I said. "She's threatening a lien over a memorial garden I planted for my late wife." Frank's friendly demeanor hardened. "She did what?" "That woman has no soul." He looked at me, really looked at me, and saw the exhaustion and the anger in my eyes. "All right. If you're going to fight her, you fight her smart. Document everything. Every letter, every conversation. Get cameras. And whatever you do, don't let her get you angry in public. She'll use it against you." His advice was sound. It confirmed my own instincts. I had found my first ally. That night, I ordered a set of high-definition, motion-activated security cameras. Not just for the front of the house, but covering the backyard, the garden, and the edge of the common area behind my property. But the real breakthrough came back at the records office. I was focusing on the biggest piece of the puzzle, the large, community common area that bordered my property. It was a huge parcel of land, maybe 20 acres, that included a playground, walking trails, and, interestingly, the small building and training grounds used by the Serenity Cove Volunteer Fire Department. In the HOA budget, the line item for common area maintenance was enormous. It was the single largest expense, funded by a hefty fee charged to every homeowner each month. Carol always boasted about how the HOA's ownership of this land added so much value to our homes. I searched for the deed transferring that parcel to the Serenity Cove HOA. I searched by parcel number, by legal description, by the developer's name. Nothing. I widened my search. I started looking at the older, parent tracts of land from before the subdivision was even a glimmer in a developer's eye. And then I found it. My heart hammered in my chest. It was a deed from 1952. The name of the grantor was familiar. It was my great-grandfather, Thomas. I read the document, my hands trembling slightly. My family had owned hundreds of acres in this county for generations. I knew we had sold most of it off over the years, but the details were lost to time. According to this deed, my great-grandfather hadn't sold this 20-acre parcel. He had donated it. He had gifted it to the county for the express purpose of civic use and public recreation. But that wasn't the bombshell. The bombshell was in the fine print. The deed contained a reverter clause. It stipulated that if the land was ever used for any purpose other than civic or public use, or if the county ever attempted to sell or transfer it, the ownership would automatically, immediately, revert to Thomas or his heirs and assigns. Me. I dug deeper, my mind racing. I found a second document, a lease agreement from 1985. The county of Oak Haven had leased the entire parcel to the Serenity Cove Volunteer Fire Department for 99 years, for the sum of $1. The fire department was legally allowed to use it for their station, for training, and to maintain the rest of it as a park for public use, consistent with the original deed's intent. There was no record, anywhere, of the land ever being transferred or sold to the developer. There was no record of it ever being legally incorporated into the Serenity Cove HOA. The ground beneath Carol's little kingdom wasn't just shaky. It didn't exist. She was president of an HOA that was charging nearly 200 families a fortune to maintain land they had absolutely no legal claim to. She had built her entire empire on a foundation of lies. And I, the descendant of the men who had gifted that land, was the one person who could prove it. The game had just changed. This was no longer about fines or trampled flowers. This was about systematic, large-scale fraud. My quiet, methodical investigation had just uncovered a structural flaw so profound it could bring the whole edifice crashing down. I walked out of the records office, clutching certified copies of the deed and the lease. The sun was bright, the air crisp. For the first time in a long time, the gray fog of my grief seemed to part, replaced by the crystal-clear, black and white clarity of a blueprint. I had my plan. It wasn't going to be a quick, angry confrontation. That wasn't my style. This was going to be a project. I would lay the foundation, set the structural supports, and then I would let Carol's own arrogance become the catastrophic load that would trigger the collapse. I was going to engineer her downfall. The first phase of any project is discovery and planning. I had the discovery part down cold. The land wasn't hers. It wasn't the HOA's. It was public land, entrusted to the county and leased to the fire department, with my family's name buried in the bedrock of its title. Carol's entire power base, the common land she lorded over, was a fiction. The fees she collected were fraudulent. Now for the plan. My goal wasn't just to win, it was to achieve a kind of poetic justice. I wanted to use her own tools, the rules, the public meetings, the veneer of legitimacy, against her. I needed her to overplay her hand so spectacularly that she would dismantle her own authority in front of everyone. I broke the plan down into phases, just like a construction schedule. Phase 1, Foundation and Bait. I needed to create a situation that would force her to publicly assert her fraudulent claim of ownership. A direct accusation would just lead to denials and legal wrangling. I needed to bait her into producing her own evidence that I knew had to be fabricated. My new camera system was the first tool. I installed them meticulously, covering every angle of my property and, crucially, the new HOA property, no trespassing, signs that had recently appeared along the edge of the common area behind my house. These signs were a new addition, a clear escalation in response to my defiance. Next, I paid a visit to Fire Chief Miller. I found him at the station, a small, functional brick building squarely in the middle of the disputed land. I introduced myself, not as a resident with a grievance, but as a civil engineer and the great-grandson of Thomas, the men who donated the land. I laid the certified copies of the 1952 deed and the 1985 lease on the table in his office. He read them, his brow furrowing. "I'll be damned," he said, looking up at me. I always wondered about that. The HOA sends us letters every few months about maintaining the property according to their standards. We mostly ignore them. We have a lease with the county, always have. They're charging residents for its upkeep, I said. A lot of money. Miller shook his head, a look of disgust on his face. That woman, Carol. She's something else. What are you planning to do? I'm working on it, I said. For now, I just need you to confirm that this lease is active and that, to your knowledge, the fire department's agreement is with the county, not the HOA. Absolutely, he said, his voice firm. We answer to the county board, not some glorified garden club. Phase 2 was setting the trap. The next monthly HOA meeting was in a week. That would be my stage. I drafted a formal letter to the board, which I also sent via certified mail. It was polite, professional, and filled with innocent-sounding questions. Dear HOA Board, it began. In the interest of clarifying my responsibilities as a homeowner, could you please provide me with the official county parcel number for the common area land behind my property? Furthermore, to ensure all residents are clear on the boundaries, could you please furnish a copy of the deed and title insurance policy for said parcel at the next public meeting? This will surely help us all appreciate the wonderful asset the HOA manages on our behalf. It was a beautifully crafted piece of bait. It was reasonable. It was public. And it would send Carol into a panic. She couldn't ignore a formal, public request for official documents. But she also couldn't produce documents that didn't exist. Her only option would be to create them. I was banking on her arrogance, her belief that no one would ever dare to check her work. The week leading up to the meeting was quiet. Eerily so. No new violation notices appeared. No passive-aggressive posts on the Facebook page. It was the calm before the storm. My cameras, however, told a different story. Late one night, 2 days before the meeting, my motion sensors pinged. I watched the live feed on my phone. 2 men I recognized as Carol's board allies, her vice president and secretary, were out on the common land. They were systematically replacing the old, weathered wooden trail markers with new, shiny metal signs that read, "Property of the Serenity Cove HOA. Private. For resident use only." They were doubling down. They were manufacturing a history of ownership. I saved the high-definition video file. It was another piece of structural steel for the trap I was building. The night of the HOA meeting arrived. It was held in the small clubhouse near the community pool. The room was packed, more so than usual. Word had clearly gotten out that there might be some fireworks between the board and the problem resident, at the end of the cul-de-sac. Carol sat at the head of a long table, flanked by her board members. She looked smug, confident. She had a folder in front of her. She had clearly prepared for my challenge. I took a seat in the back, my own folder in my lap, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic cadence. I wasn't nervous. I was an engineer on inspection day. I was just there to watch the test and record the results. After droning through the minutes and the treasurer's report, Carol finally got to new business. She looked out at the audience, her eyes landing on me. "We have a request from Mr. Mark for some documentation regarding our beautiful common areas," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Mark seems to have some confusion about how our community is managed, and we are more than happy to clear it up for him." She opened her folder. "Some people," she continued, her gaze sweeping the room, "like to cause trouble. They question the hard work and dedication of your volunteer board. But we believe in transparency." She held up a single sheet of paper. "This," she announced dramatically, "is a copy of the quitclaim deed from 2005, when the developer officially turned over the common lands to the Homeowners Association. It proves, beyond any doubt, that the HOA is the rightful, legal owner of all community property, including the land behind Mark's house." She placed the document on the overhead projector. A blurry, hard-to-read image appeared on the screen. It looked vaguely official, with signatures and a notary stamp. It was exactly what I had hoped for. She hadn't just claimed ownership, she had produced a physical document to prove it. A forgery. She had committed a felony in front of 30 witnesses. The trap was set. Now it was time to spring it. I waited for her to finish her triumphant little speech. The room was quiet, most residents looking satisfied that the matter was settled. Carol was beaming, a conquering queen. I stood up. "Thank you, Carol," I said, my voice calm and even. "I appreciate you sharing that document. It's certainly very interesting." I walked to the front of the room, my own folder in hand. In the spirit of that same transparency, I also did some research at the county records office, and I seem to have found some conflicting information. I was hoping you could help me understand the discrepancy. Her smile flickered. "There is no discrepancy," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. "Well, for instance," I said, ignoring her and addressing the room, "this is a certified copy of the original deed for that parcel of land, dated 1952, I placed it on the projector, replacing her document. The text was crisp, clear. It shows the land was donated to the county by my great-grandfather for public use." A murmur went through the crowd. I could see people leaning forward, squinting at the screen. "And this," I continued, placing the next document on the projector, "is a copy of the 99-year lease, signed in 1985, between the county and the Serenity Cove Volunteer Fire Department for the entire parcel. As you can see, that lease is still very much active. The murmuring grew louder. I saw Frank in the middle of the room. He was grinning from ear to ear. Carol stood up, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. Those documents are irrelevant. They're ancient history. We have the deed, she sputtered. Then this should be easy to clear up, I said smoothly. The document you showed us, the quitclaim deed. It should have a recording number on it from the county clerk. If you could just point that out to us, we can look it up on the county's public website right now and see the officially filed version. Checkmate. The room fell silent. Everyone looked at Carol. Her eyes darted from me to the screen, to the faces of the residents. She was trapped. She knew, and I knew, that there was no recording number because the document had never been filed. Because it was a fake. Her reaction was not one of quiet defeat. It was an explosion. "This is harassment," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He's a liar. He's trying to sabotage our community. He's probably after the land for himself, trying to steal it from all of you." She was losing control, her mask of composed authority shattering into a million pieces. "This man is a menace. He's been violating our rules since the day he moved in. He's a danger to our children with his illegal fires." But her tirade wasn't having the intended effect. The residents weren't looking at me with suspicion anymore. They were looking at her. They were seeing a cornered animal, lashing out with wild, baseless accusations. Her credibility, the foundation of her power, had just cracked. It wasn't gone yet, but the structural integrity was fatally compromised. "I'm not trying to take anything," I said into the stunned silence, my voice still level. "I'm just trying to understand why our HOA is charging us hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to maintain land it doesn't appear to own. I think that's a question we all deserve an answer to." I gathered my papers and walked back to my seat, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the tense room. Carol stood at the front, speechless, her face a thunderous canvas of rage and humiliation. The trap had sprung beautifully. But I knew this was far from over. A cornered animal is at its most dangerous. The real escalation was about to begin. The aftermath of the meeting was like the eerie silence after a bomb blast. The residents filed out, whispering amongst themselves, pointedly avoiding eye contact with Carol. She and her board remained at the front table, huddled together like conspirators. I knew what was coming. I had publicly humiliated her and exposed the central lie of her reign. She wasn't just going to retaliate, she was going to try to annihilate me. Her first move was a vicious smear campaign. Within days, anonymous flyers appeared on every car and doorstep in Serenity Cove. They were cheaply printed, filled with inflammatory language. They accused a certain new resident on the cul-de-sac of being a litigious troublemaker who was attempting a hostile takeover of our community assets. It hinted that I had a history of suing my neighbors and was a danger to the peaceful harmony of our neighborhood. It was libel, pure and simple. But it was effective. The suspicion that had been brewing among my neighbors now had fuel. I saw them pulling their children a little closer when I walked by. The friendly wave stopped completely. I was being ostracized, painted as a monster. Next, she came after my livelihood. I worked as an independent engineering consultant. My reputation was everything. One of my biggest clients was a local municipality I had a long-standing contract with. Carol, through some digging, must have found out. I got a call from the city manager, a man I'd worked with for years. "Mark," he said, his voice hesitant. "I got a strange call today. A woman named Carol, president of your HOA. She went on a long rant about you being an unstable and aggressive individual. Said you were harassing your neighbors and that the city should reconsider its association with you." My blood ran cold. "And what did you say?" "I told her that in 10 years of working with you, I've known you to be nothing but the consummate professional," he said, and I felt a wave of relief. "But Mark, you need to get this sorted out. Calls like that, no matter how crazy, can cause problems." He was right. She was trying to burn my life to the ground. She even escalated to harassing my daughter. My daughter called me one evening, upset. A woman had approached her on her university campus, a woman who matched Carol's description. She had told my daughter that her father was a criminal and that she should be careful or she might get caught up in his mess. That was it. That was the final line. Mess with me, fine. Mess with my livelihood, I can handle it. But you do not threaten my child. The cold, methodical engineer was now fueled by a father's protective rage. Her final act of desperation was the most predictable. She tried to use the law against me. One Saturday morning, a large truck from the county's Code Enforcement Division pulled up to my house. 2 officers got out, clipboards in hand. "Sir, we've received a complaint about illegal dumping and unpermitted construction on this property," the lead officer said. I knew exactly what this was. "A complaint from whom?" I asked. "It was anonymous," he said, not meeting my eye. They walked around to the back of the house, and I followed. There, next to Sarah's memorial garden, was a pile of broken concrete, rebar, and old roofing shingles. It hadn't been there the night before. "This is what the complaint was about," the officer said, pointing to the debris. I just nodded. I had been waiting for this. "I see. You might want to check the timestamp on that anonymous complaint," I said calmly. "Because my security cameras recorded 2 individuals dumping that debris here at 2:15 this morning." I pointed to the discrete camera under the eave. "The high-definition night vision is excellent. I'm sure you'll be able to get a clear look at their faces and their license plate." The officers exchanged a look. Their demeanor changed instantly from officious to wary. They knew they had just stepped into the middle of a nasty dispute and were being used as pawns. They took my statement, looked at the video footage on my phone, and left, promising a full investigation into the illegal dumping. Carol's attempt to frame me had backfired, creating yet another piece of evidence against her. It was during this storm of retaliation that the final piece of the puzzle fell into my lap. I received an email from an anonymous, encrypted address. "I have information about the Serenity Cove HOA," it read. "I am the treasurer. Carol is stealing from us. I am scared, but I can't let this continue. We need to talk." It was the whistleblower. The insider who could connect all the dots. We arranged a clandestine meeting in a coffee shop in the next town over. He was a nervous man in his 60s named George. His hands shook as he held his coffee cup. "I've been the treasurer for 5 years," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Carol controls everything. The finances, the records. I just sign the checks she puts in front of me." "The common area maintenance fees," I prompted. "It's a scam," he said, sweat beading on his forehead. "Every month, I cut a huge check to a company called Evergreen Landscape Solutions for common area upkeep." I got suspicious. The amount seemed way too high. So I looked up the company. He slid a piece of paper across the table. "It's a shell corporation. The address is A.P.O. Box. And the registered agent? It's Carol's maiden name." My jaw tightened. "She's paying herself. Tens of thousands of dollars a year," George confirmed. 4 years. She created fake invoices, and I signed the checks. It's wire fraud. It's mail fraud. After that meeting where you showed those deeds, I knew it was all going to come out. She forged that quitclaim deed herself, using a template she found online. I saw her do it. I'm an accessory to a felony, and I'm not going to prison for that woman." He handed me a flash drive. "It's all here," he said. "Scanned copies of the bank statements, the fake invoices, the checks. Everything you need." This was the smoking gun. This was the undeniable proof of major financial crimes. My case had just gone from a civil dispute over property to a multi-felony criminal case. I now had everything I needed to bring the entire rotten structure down. I spent the next 2 days compiling my project report. It was a masterpiece of organized evidence. I created a binder, tabbed and indexed. Tab A, Property Fraud. Contained the certified deeds, the lease agreement, and photos of the fraudulent HOA property signs. Tab B, Forgery. Contained a high-quality photo of the forged deed Carol presented at the meeting, alongside an affidavit from a forensic document expert I hired, who confirmed it was a digital fabrication. Tab C, Harassment and Libel. Contained copies of the flyers, my correspondence with my client about her call, and a sworn statement from my daughter. Tab D, Criminal Conspiracy. contained the video of her cronies planting the construction debris on my property and the corresponding police report. Tab E, Financial Crimes. This was the motherlode. It contained all the documents from George's flash drive, the evidence of wire fraud, mail fraud, and embezzlement. This was no longer a matter for the HOA or even the local police. This was a case for the district attorney. I made an appointment with the DA's Economic Crimes Unit. I walked in not as a rambling, angry victim, but as a professional presenting a case file. I laid the binder on the table in front of a senior prosecutor. "I'm a civil engineer," I began. "I've identified a significant structural failure in my community, and I've documented the causes. I believe you'll find it's a criminal matter." He spent an hour going through the binder, his expression growing more and more grim. When he was done, he looked up at me. "Mister," he said, "this is one of the most well-documented cases of fraud I have ever seen. We're not just going to look into this. We're going to take it." He explained that they would need to conduct their own investigation, but my file gave them everything they needed to get warrants. He asked me to keep quiet and let them work. He also had an idea. "She's trying to get you thrown out of the HOA," he asked. "They've called a special meeting for next week," I confirmed. "A community tribunal to vote on my expulsion." A slow smile spread across the prosecutor's face. "Perfect," he said. Let her set the stage for her own downfall. We'll be there." The final showdown was scheduled. The night of the community tribunal was thick with tension. The clubhouse was overflowing. It seemed every resident of Serenity Cove was there to witness the final act. Carol had framed this as the moment the community would stand together and excise the cancer in its midst. She had no idea she had actually gathered the perfect audience for her own public execution. I arrived with Frank, who had insisted on coming as a character witness. I saw several unfamiliar faces in the crowd, men and women in plain clothes who were clearly not residents. They were scattered around the room, observing. The DA's investigators had arrived. Carol, looking more regal and self-righteous than ever, called the meeting to order. She launched into a long, rambling indictment of me. She painted me as a monster, a bully, a man who cared for nothing but his own selfish desires, who threatened their safety and their property values. She presented her evidence, the stack of violation notices, a wildly exaggerated account of the bonfire, a fabricated story about me threatening her. It was a masterclass in projection and lies. "This man sought to undermine the very foundations of our community," she declared, her voice ringing with false passion. "He tried to steal our land, harass your board, and tear down everything we have built together. It is time for us to stand as one and vote to remove this menace from our presence forever." She finished to scattered, uncertain applause from her staunchest supporters. Then, she turned to me, a cruel smirk on her face. "Does the accused have anything to say before the vote?" "I do," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. I walked to the front of the room, not with a folder this time, but with a laptop and a small projector. I connected it to the same screen she had used to display her forged deed. "You're all here because Carol has told you I'm a threat to your property values," I began, my voice calm and measured. "Well, I'm an engineer. My job is to evaluate structures and ensure their integrity. For the past several weeks, I've been conducting a structural analysis of our HOA. I'd like to present my findings." My first slide popped up on the screen. It was a high-resolution image of the 1952 deed from my great-grandfather. "Finding number 1, I said. The land you've all been paying to maintain is, in fact, public land, donated to the county for civic use. The HOA has never owned it." Gasps rippled through the room. "You saw a deed that Carol presented at the last meeting," I continued, clicking to the next slide. It showed her forged deed next to a screenshot of the county's official records website, showing no such document existed. That document was a fabrication. A forgery. The gasps turned to angry murmurs. Carol was on her feet now. "Lies. This is all lies." I ignored her. Finding number 2, harassment and intimidation. The next slide showed crystal clear stills from my security camera of her 2 board members dumping construction debris in my yard at 2 in the morning. Their faces were perfectly visible. The 2 men in question shrank in their seats, their faces turning ghost white. "Finding number 3, I said, my voice growing harder. embezzlement and fraud. The next slides were the bank statements. The fake invoices. The checks made out to Evergreen Landscape Solutions, and the final, damning slide, the corporate registration for Evergreen, showing Carol's name as the sole officer. I had highlighted the hundreds of thousands of dollars that had been funneled from the HOA's bank account into her shell company over 5 years. She hasn't been protecting your property values, I said, my voice ringing with authority. She has been stealing from you. From every single one of you. The room erupted. The murmurs became shouts of anger and betrayal. People were on their feet, yelling at the board table. The entire meeting had devolved into chaos. Carol was completely unhinged. Her face was contorted in a mask of pure fury. She wasn't just losing an argument, her entire world was collapsing in on her in real time. He's a witch. It's a witch hunt, she screamed, her voice cracking. She lunged forward, trying to grab my laptop, to stop the evidence from being seen. I'll sue you. I'll sue all of you. It was at that precise moment that the plainclothed investigators chose to act. 2 of them stepped forward, flanking her. A man with a calm, authoritative voice held up a badge. Carol, he said, his voice easily cutting through the din, you're under arrest for forgery, wire fraud, mail fraud, and embezzlement. The entire room fell dead silent. The only sound was the clicking of the handcuffs as another investigator secured her wrists behind her back. The color drained from her face, replaced by a pasty, slack-jawed shock. The fight went out of her instantly. She seemed to shrink, the powerful HOA president deflating into a confused, defeated old woman. As they led her through the stunned crowd, she turned and locked eyes with me. The rage flared one last time. You'll regret this, she rasped, her voice a hollow whisper. I'll destroy you. It was the most pathetic, impotent threat I had ever heard. It was the sound of a collapsed structure groaning under its own weight. The sound of finality. The downfall of Carol and her corrupt board was swift and total. The community was in shock for weeks, but that shock soon gave way to a sense of liberation. The old board resigned in disgrace. Frank, the retired detective, was unanimously elected as the interim president to oversee the transition. The first order of business was to stop collecting the fraudulent common area fees, which immediately lowered everyone's monthly dues by a significant amount. An independent auditor was brought in, and they uncovered the full extent of Carol's theft. It was even worse than I had imagined. She had been treating the HOA's bank account as her personal slush fund for nearly a decade. The legal consequences for her were severe. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had compiled, she had no choice but to plead guilty. She was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. She was also ordered to pay full restitution, which meant liquidating every asset she owned, her house, her cars, her savings. Her husband filed for divorce before the sentencing was even over. Her cronies on the board, faced with their own conspiracy charges, also pled guilty and received probation and hefty fines. They sold their homes and moved away in shame. Serenity Cove began to heal. Without the constant threat of violation notices and the oppressive atmosphere of Carol's rule, people started to relax. Neighbors began talking to each other again. A community barbecue was organized on the common land, the land that was now officially recognized as a public park. Chief Miller and his volunteer firefighters were the guests of honor. They even let the kids climb on their fire truck. I, somewhat reluctantly, became a local hero. People would stop me on my walks to thank me. They called me brave. I didn't feel brave. I just felt like an engineer who had seen a flawed design and couldn't rest until he had corrected it. I had been pushed into a war I never wanted, but in fighting it, I had helped restore the peace I had originally come here to find. As for me, I finally found my own serenity. My wife's memorial garden, once a source of conflict, was now thriving. I expanded it, adding more of her favorite plants. Sometimes, neighbors would leave a small painted stone or a flower at the base of the bench. It became a quiet, beautiful corner of the community, a testament to the memory of the woman who had dreamed of this place with me. 1 year after that first, fateful bonfire, on Sarah's birthday, I built another one. I used the same steel fire pit on the same gravel pad. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, I saw figures walking down the cul-de-sac toward my house. It was Frank, and several other neighbors. They were carrying camp chairs and bags of marshmallows. "Thought you could use some company," Frank said with a grin. A little while later, we heard the familiar rumble of the fire engine. But this time, it didn't have its lights flashing. The truck pulled up, and Chief Miller hopped out. He was carrying a case of beer. "Just making sure you're following regulations," he said, a twinkle in his eye. "Looks like you're short on beverages." "That's a safety violation in my book." We all laughed. I sat there, surrounded by new friends, the warmth of the fire on my face, and looked up at the star-filled sky. The smoke curled upwards, carrying with it a sense of peace and closure. I thought of Sarah, and I knew she would have loved this. The house was built, the garden was growing, and the community was finally the sanctuary we had always imagined. The foundation was sound. The structure was strong. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was finally home.